One thing I've been thinking about recently is how alignment isn't really just aligning your actions, but aligning everything about you in a way. And I don't even necessarily mean that with just our thoughts, but the way we feel. I think until we actually give ourselves permission to be new, we won't be new. And what I mean by that is actually letting go of the things that are holding us back. I think sometimes we think we can't do certain things, and I think that entire framework is what creates the inability. I think sometimes our capabilities are really only measured by our ability to think that we can do something. They say he who thinks he can and he who thinks he can are typically both correct. And typically we don't give ourselves permission to, you know, posit any type of positivity in the future or posit some type of possibility within the chances that are out there. Like actually telling ourselves that we might have the ability to do something. And instead of, becoming sufficient with the answer of no, actually giving ourselves a chance to trial. Giving ourselves a chance to experience what is actually out here. Otherwise, all we're really going to experience is in reference to who we think we are. I think many of us want to expand who we think we are. We already know ourselves to be a certain way. Like I was reading a comment the other day, and it was like, yeah, we really are just getting accustomed to a certain costume, a certain way of expression. And I think it's about acknowledging that you already know who you are in this scenario in a way. You already know the costume, the expression that you've given out. And the only way to sort of be free from that, because I know a lot of times it feels like, you're already within this known, like what else is there to know, or this is all I know. That's all the more reason to figure out more. I think sometimes not knowing is one of the greatest invitations for us. It's about, expanding yourself into certain scenarios, situations, circumstances, and thoughts, ideas, and perspective that, you know, aren't necessarily telltale for you, aren't necessarily what your mind first tends towards, but definitely things that you can improve from. And I think we can improve from any scenario we're present enough to improve in. It's always about as much presence as we can give to a certain situation that allows it to transform us. And that's why I think certain things can be transformative but not really have that much real meaning. Because the meaning is always assigned by the person whose perspective we're talking about. Like the meaning in me doing anything in my life is always inherent to my relationship to myself. And that's why I think sometimes when we disregard this self in regards to our ability to change, we lose a lot. Because we don't acknowledge possibilities out there for us to experience happiness in different ways. Like we don't acknowledge certain perspectives that would allow us to be happy about things that we pass by every day. There are so many things that I think are dampened by familiarity, including ourselves, that we need to learn how to give ourselves appreciation for, or at least appreciate, so we can feel the appreciation. And when I say appreciate so you can feel the appreciation, I really mean that whatever we give to a situation is what the situation presents. If you give positivity to a situation, that's what you feel. If you give gratitude to anyone, anything, you feel that gratitude. It's not like, they can feel appreciated. They can feel that gratitude in a way, but you're always the first person who feels it. And until we stop sort of holding a wall up between us and our satisfaction, us, our gratitude, us, and our positive feelings, we're always going to feel like our situations in life are dependent on the absence of negativity. We act as if there's nothing else consistent than negativity. It's like we're constantly trying to fight off, negative aspects of the world when really we're just perpetuating them ourselves. And that's not to say that who we are is inherently negative, but to say many a times I think we're taught to think in negative ways. We're taught to think in a way that actually takes away from ourselves rather than adds us on. We live in a constant world of comparison to other people, and we take ourselves away from who we actually are, any type of grounding in some type of positivity, because we think our positivity for ourselves has to be referenced to anyone else. And I was thinking about it earlier too, about reference. And in all actuality, I think the only point of contrast and reference is to have gratitude. I never think that we should use our reference in a way to demean our certain circumstances. And that doesn't mean not addressing certain issues within the world. That just means not allowing those issues to take away from you. I think our power is constantly stripped away by our constant acknowledgement that we are powerless in a way. And that's not to say that, you know, we have some type of grand sense of power in the real world. But to say that the only way we're ever going to achieve that type of community power and I guess love is through its instantiation and establishment within us. We can't put anything into the world until we first give it to ourselves. And that's why I think us waiting on certain people, certain reactions, certain feelings, and certain circumstances in order to give us a certain feeling is sort of backwards. And I think that's why a lot of us are chasing towards no end. And people reach points in their life where they flip everything around because they recognize that the feeling is not brought about by anything but you. It's always about how you relate to something. And waiting on certain feelings to transpire is like waiting on your next thought. You know, it's something that really never comes, or something that just sits there until you feel it in. And until we learn to fill ourselves up, we won't really learn how to give anything. And when I say fill ourselves up, I mean give to ourselves. You know, give ourselves a real opportunity to treat ourselves with some type of care. You know, something I used to say all the time is treat yourself like a friend. Because I think we really do need to treat ourselves like friends. We really do need to, you know, give ourselves real opportunities to change. You know, open the door for us to emerge, open the door for us to walk through, and also take the time to do the things that constitute that change. And what that means to me is like taking yourself seriously. Not taking the world seriously, but taking yourself seriously. Like, if you want to achieve a certain something, why can't you do it? Who's telling you that you can't? Like, take yourself seriously in a way of giving yourself enough affirmation to actually go out and do exactly what you want. And when I say don't take the world seriously, I don't necessarily mean don't care about the issues present with the world that are important, but to say that many of the times the issues that we have with our current circumstances in the world are in reference to our own mental insecurities. It's like, I feel this way, so I feel inadequate for this, and now I have a problem. Now I feel like I need to work on this so I can feel adequate enough to do this. When in reality, your terms of adequacy is just reference to usually a little bit of information, not necessarily a lack of capability, but a lack of understanding of what exactly you want to do. And I think many of the times we don't have that understanding of what we want to do, and we harm ourselves in thinking that it's about our capability. You know, we don't know how to funnel our energy and attention in a certain way, so we think that we're deficient in some way. And I think it's important to sort of give yourself your bearings back and understand that to know what's humanly possible means you too can do it. And I think, if anything, our mind should be used for our benefit. Why should we not tell ourselves we can? Why should we not tell ourselves, why not me? What objective do we have in telling ourselves the opposite? Does that do anything for us? Does that take us away from anything? And of course, people might say, well, then you can get your hopes up. We should have our hopes up. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. What I think people get mixed up in, including myself, is expectation. You know, we expect certain things to be a certain way, not because we want them to, but because we need them to. And when I say when we need them to, I mean that we make our emotions in state dependent on the way certain things look in an external sense. Like, oh, if this exam goes well, then I'll feel happy. So I expect to do well on an exam, otherwise I'll feel unhappy. You know, it's these dichotomies in relationships that we set up over and over again that take away from us. It's because we, you know, instantiate that I have to feel this way in proportion to this, that we have to. Because it's a framework that we've accepted, a framework that we go by. And that's not to say we shouldn't care about certain things. It's not to say don't care about your test because it doesn't matter. It's to say recognize its purpose. Recognize what it's showing you, learn your lesson, and continue to move forward. But all of which can be done with you being happy for being you, occupying the space that you're taking up, and filling yourself with love. I think sometimes you have to love yourself enough to love yourself. It's like whenever things do go wrong, we often attack ourselves rather than, you know, giving ourselves more affirmation, rather than telling ourselves that we got this and we can, you know, move forward with whatever it is and continue to be us. And what I think is sort of misconstrued is the whole idea of who we are and in you. There's no one set way to be anyone. There's no one set way to be you. And I think it's important to constantly affirm and acknowledge that. And no matter how you express yourself, you're still expressing yourself. So it's important to recognize that you need to learn how to express with enough care, both to yourself and to the world around you, to actually make sure your circumstances and scenarios can go the best they can. And one thing about it is, we really only can do the best we can. And the rest has to be given up because that's all we can. It's literally about putting yourself into your situations, into your life in a present way, in a way full of care, in a way full of the world constantly unfolding in front of you, and appreciating its unfolding, appreciating the changes in scenery, appreciating the changes in character, and learning how to not cope with it, but learning to accept it. That life is change. A lot of what we experience is constantly changing. And it's important that everything is constantly changing, because to not change is to be dead in a way. Not in some type of grotesque sense, but in a real scientific sense. We have to understand that our life is always going to be filled with what we give it, I think. And I don't know. I think I'm realizing this more recently, that it never has really been about anything outside of us. Not in the sense to say I only care about my inner state, I only care about myself, anything like that. But to say our feelings, our dependencies on things to look certain ways, the way we attach ourselves to certain concepts and certain ideas and certain things to value ourselves, has never really had any real place for us. It's always been, I think, a method of taking away our power, a method of taking away our ability to think for ourselves in a way. Because I think thinking for yourself and that self-actualization only really comes once we give ourselves an opportunity to not be worried, to not be worried about how things look, to not be worried about how I'm going to get this or how I'm going to get that. Keeping you in this constant race of trying to grab at certain things, including parts of yourself. Like, I want to be this strong. I want to be this courageous. I want to be this, and we never, give it to ourselves. We never give ourselves a perspective that allows it to be present where we are. And I think that's where we take away our power, by not recognizing that any type of acquisition is always within the present moment. You never gain something in the future. You'll gain it in a present, no matter what happens. So the objective isn't to constantly put stuff off to the future and wait for your happiness. It's to instantiate happiness now and not make it dependent on how things look. And I think, of course, that's easier said than done. Of course it is. But I think even in small doses, in small increments, we can learn to change our lives for the better. And I think in my experience, I've done this a lot. Like, I don't necessarily think I feel a lot of negative emotions regularly. Like, I genuinely don't think so, because my mind is fixed towards positivity. Not in a way of like, if something negative happens, I'm like, ooh, it's positive. But to say if something negative happens, I let it be negative. And I let myself be positive. It's about not comparing and contrasting. Not making everything about you in a different way. Allowing your state and your being to be the way it is, regardless. And that's not always easy. Again, there is definitely situations that can turn me upside down, that can make me feel a certain way. There's no question about that. But I think in those certain situations, all we're presented with is an opportunity to see more of ourselves. And I think if we learn to accept that part of ourselves that is feeling pain, then we'll learn to love it even greater. Then we'll learn to expand ourselves into certain situations and learn to maintain not necessarily who we are, but maintain our state of being, maintain our happiness throughout our change, not making it dependent on certain things. And I think that's what strength is. Not our ability to not get knocked down, but our ability to keep getting up. Not our ability to not get cut or harmed, but to continue to heal, continue to change. That's where I think our true strength is. So, I don't know. If you made it this far in the video, thank you very much. I really do appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope we are taking care of ourselves. And giving ourselves some type of validity, telling ourselves that we can. There's no point in telling yourself you can't. Truly. any expectation that we have is not necessarily a cause for feeling. It's just a thought that we have. Or I desire for this certain thing to go this way. But who says that has to determine how you feel? I think part of our emotion is already invested in future events. And that's why we feel so much anxiety. Because we know our emotion is dependent on some type of future thing rather than something that's occurring right now. All that to say thank you. Keep being y'all, keep being great. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. Do what you can, what you have. Yeah.